That electrification is the future. So for purposes...
Well, I mean, is it the future based on consumer demand or government policy?
I would say it's a mix.
Just say we did away with the mandate. Trump says he wants to do away. Will that end electric car manufacturing in America?
No.
Do you know the current federal subsidy that goes into electric vehicles, what the amount is per vehicle?
It's up to $7,500.
Do you agree that all of that's being borrowed to push that onto consumers?
Well, CBO's estimate was that the Inflation Reduction Act was more than paid for, so I'm not sure I agree with that.
I'd say that's a fake pay for.
If they've got so many market appeals, why do we need government subsidies? How many U.S. automakers are making money producing EVs?
Senator, as I said in my remarks, we're in the early innings. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So yes, costs are going to have to come down.
Yeah, well, how much are they losing on average?
Depends on the manufacturer and their product cycle.
So why are they doing it? Because they're getting government subsidies. How long do they last?
The battery itself can last quite some time, and then, of course, it can be
How long?
repurposed.
If electric cars are so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them? Here's where all electric vehicles are. California loves them. The West Coast loves them. Everybody else is kind of lukewarm.
It relates to cost. Only a fraction of currently eligible
How much do you
vehicles
think
are
it'll
eligible
cost?
for the federal tax credit. So
How much do you think it'll cost, David?
Senator, I think I quoted earlier
I'm
that
calling on you, sir.
Apologies.
How much do you think it'll cost?
it ultimately depends on
You
consumer
don't know,
adoption.
do you?
We don't have an exact figure.
You think
no,
we ought
Senator.
to just keep throwing money at it until we hit the jackpot? Despite what the Princeton professor thinks, we don't have unlimited money. This is not Princeton.
We have 5 witnesses here today who've been agreed on, each a bipartisan selection. The first is Dr. Jesse Jenkins, assistant professor at Princeton University with a joint appointment in the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. Our second witness is Britta Gross, director of transportation at EPRI, formerly the Electric Power Research Institute. Third is Maureen Hinman, the co-founder and executive chair of Silverado Policy Accelerator. Our next witness is David Schwietert, the chief policy officer at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. And last but not least, we have Jeff Davis, a senior fellow with the E&O Center of Transportation.
So what do? I mean, I believe, have the smartest, most talented auto workers and automakers in the world. We need to do our part to help them create a level playing field. And that's why I'm so glad that we are doing this hearing, because we're talking about more than 10 million good-paying jobs right now. So, Mr. Jenkins, in your testimony, you mentioned the most important thing Congress can do now for the EV sector is to provide policy certainty and continuity. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I know that our private sector, our automakers say, just give me certainty about what's going on.
Thank you, Senator. By that, I mean that the tax credits that were implemented in the IRA have just been finalized in terms of their guidance, and many of the programs authorized and funded by the infrastructure law are authorized to spend down through 2026. So these programs are just getting underway, and industry needs to know that they can count on a stable policy environment to make the hundreds of billions of dollars of investments that they've announced across the United States, and to do that with confidence, to drive innovation and to expand our supply chains. And so I think the most important thing that can be done now is to provide that confidence for the industry with bipartisan support for the maintenance of existing policies. Also note that on the consumer side, consumers are just getting familiar with how these tax credits work. January this year, we started to offer at point of sale rebates. That's a new thing for people. So there's a lot for people to get familiar with. We just set the stage. Let's let our American companies and innovators play on that stage and do what they do best.
Should we do more to mine for critical minerals domestically? And what specific pieces of environmental legislation should we amend to improve our mining capacity? And let me suggest before you answer that maybe a couple months ago I read about the nickel mining in Indonesia at the same time that our own government was not allowing such mining in Minnesota.
Well, Senator, thank you for those questions. I would like to underscore that, again, there's a record number of options and choices available to consumers today. As it relates to the supply chains, The best time to start was yesterday. The next best time on permitting was to start today. So we can't have permitting reform fast enough as it relates to addressing not only what the U.S. may need for future supply chain resilience, but also working with our allies and partners, knowing that obviously auto standards are set well into the future. And even if we started today with mining and extracting in the U.S., it might be 15 or more years before we may see the benefits of that extraction processing. So again, I think that underscores the critical importance. If the U.S. is to remain competitive across all vehicle platforms, that the supply chain piece is fundamental.
Are car companies making electric vehicles because they have to or they want to?
Senator, I think there's no question, as you noted earlier, that electrification is the future. So for purposes...
Well, I mean, is it the future based on consumer demand or government policy?
I would say it's a mix. Obviously, I think regulations
Okay.
or policy... Yep.
I agree. Mr. Jenkins, why does China make electric vehicles because of climate policy?
No, it's primarily a response to strategic manufacturing policy and air pollution reduction goals. They basically strategically selected electric vehicles as an opportunity to leapfrog internal combustion engine manufacturing, which is an area that the West, the United States,
But
and
it's
others
not
dominate.
driven by climate. I mean,
It's
if you're
not
really
primarily
worried
driven by
about the climate, you wouldn't use a coal-fired plant to power an electric vehicle plant, right?
Well, with China's average grid mix, it actually does reduce greenhouse gas emissions relative to an internal
So
combustion
are they
engine.
making all these cars because they're worried about the environment?
They're worried primarily about air pollution and their strategic role in manufacturing in the global market.
Ms. Hinman, why do we make electric cars? Is it because of consumer demand or government policy?
My sense is it's per my colleague to my left is because it's a combination of the two. But
Okay,
you know,
so-
we're a market economy, so
Right.
the government does work.
So
to help
some
the market
people want
signals.
them, right? So, David, if we did away with the mandate or the goal of having half the vehicle fleet electrified, a government policy, by 2035, what percentage of the cars on the road do you think would be electric without a mandate?
Senator, that's a very good question. Last year was 9.5%. So if we fast forward, it's hard to say. A lot of it depends on how reliant
Well,
we are.
let's just say we did away with the mandate. Trump says he wants to do away. Will that end electric car manufacturing in America?
No. However, we might have unbalanced things as it relates to whether or not the U.S. is competitive as it relates to some of those supportive policies, whether it's tax incentives or...
Right.
Yes.
Why do we never hear about this? If it was the reverse and driving your electric car was 5 times more expensive than driving your fuel combustion car, you can bet every fossil fuel company in America would be publicizing that. Why don't we hear that it's 5 times cheaper to drive an electric car? Dr. Jenkins, you want to comment on that?
Well, I do think you raise a great point, Senator Merkley. We're at the early stages of this transition, and I think we do need a lot more advertising and proactive efforts to educate the public from the industry itself, from automakers and dealerships, and potentially from public sources as well. It's a significant cost differential.
Do the three of you believe that consumers should have the right to choose the type of vehicle that best fits their own needs, economic circumstances? Or do you think we ought to be orchestrating this from here when we've never even figured out how to spend less than we take in, and we're currently borrowing from these very same consumers and others around the world to the tune of $2 trillion a year currently?
Senator, I would say that consumers do have the option to choose the vehicles that best suit them. We have a wide variety of offerings on the market today and no requirement that anyone anywhere purchases an electric vehicle. The prices are increasingly affordable as well, so this is a moving target.
Do you know the current federal subsidy that goes into electric vehicles, what the amount is per vehicle?
It's up to $7,500 for the consumer
Do you know
purchase.
what that is in total that we're currently doing?
I believe I just read it was about $125 billion. I can get back to that.
Would you agree that all of that's being borrowed to push that onto consumers?
Well, CBO's estimate was that the Inflation Reduction Act was more than paid for, so I'm not sure I agree with that.
I'd say that's a fake pay for, but thank you for your opinion.
If they've got so many market appeals, why do we need government subsidies? take it up. I would say you don't. We should end them. Mr. Schwietert.
Sure, Senator. Obviously, you're talking about affordability generally. Excuse me. Obviously, when it comes to the record number of products, it's both the industrial policy as well as, the marketplace dynamics.
We mess up when government doesn't do very well. For example, we spent $7.5 billion to do charging stations. After more than 2 years, we've got 7 of them. Testimony was talking about we've basically run the Highway Trust Fund into insolvency, and we haven't really fixed that. Why is China producing all these electric vehicles? For its own home market? It's for central planning,
sure,
industrial engineering in other countries, correct? Is there any major Western country that doesn't subsidize EVs because of climate alarmism? How many U.S. automakers are making money producing EVs?
Senator, as I said in my remarks, we're in the early innings. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So yes, costs are going to have to come down.
Yeah, well, how much are they losing on average?
Depends on the manufacturer and their product cycle.
So why are they doing it? Because they're getting government subsidies, right? The consumers are being subsidized, and the automakers are also being subsidized, correct? And the mandate we're talking about are the things like CAFE standards that coerce them to offer EVs so they can produce vehicles that American consumers do want. I mean, I'd never go to 100% EV. Happy to do the hybrid, happy to be environmental. I want the comfort of having an internal combustion engine.
Yeah, Senator, as it relates to the recent auto standards, we've been pretty clear with the Biden administration. Obviously, we need to ensure that there's alignment as it relates to where the market is, as well as encouraging.
No, there won't be alignment where the market is. Government's not that smart. I mean, honestly, $7.5 billion, we have 7 charging stations. We've run the Highway Trust Fund back 2008 insolvent. We haven't fixed that problem. And we're going to have this command economy, and we're going to plan for a growth in the electrical grid. By the way, we don't have the mining capacity. I would argue we really don't have the electrical capacity. Those climate alarmists are generally opposed to nuclear, which certainly would be part of the problem. China dominates the battery industry, and our subsidies are providing a market for China's command economy. How does any of this make sense?
Senator, just with respect, our subsidies are targeted to U.S. manufacturing of batteries through 45X, and the consumer EV tax credits are specifically designed to excise China from the supply chain.
How many consumers have experienced the cost of replacing a battery in an EV?
It's an extremely rare occurrence.
What
percent? It's an extremely rare occurrence.
They don't last forever, do they? How long do they last?
Neither does an internal combustion engine car or transmission.
There are cars on the road from the 30s and 40s and 50s. How long is an EV battery going to last? And what is the cost to replace it?
EV batteries account for anywhere from 30 to 40% of upfront costs. Obviously, there's warranty and durability built into those batteries, but yes.
How long do they last?
The battery itself can last quite some time, and then, of course, it can be repurposed and reused.
A couple 100,000 miles at least.
Yeah.
We've had Teslas on the road with that many miles already.
And it's going to cost $10,000, $20,000 to replace?
Well, that's the cost today.
What about recycling of them? What about recycling of wind turbines? I mean, I'm seeing these pictures of these massive dumps of these wind turbines just collapsing. And again, it doesn't make economic sense because government is trying to centrally plan, and government's awful at it.
I just wanted to pipe in if I could,
Sure.
Sir, on battery recycling. Batteries are eminently recyclable and are near
Not the lithium batteries. We don't have capacity for doing it right now.
Well,
we
actually,
haven't developed a way of doing it.
We are building that capacity, and certainly the U.S. is a leader in the standards.
Kind of like Senator Brown was talking about, yeah, we have to rely on all these technological innovations we don't have yet. And let's face it, they've been trying to innovate batteries for decades and really haven't been able to do it, have they?
I'm not sure I would agree with that. The costs have fallen dramatically. The density has doubled in the last 9 years or 7 years. So battery innovation is dramatic, and with
That's
support.
Good. So let the marketplace dictate the speed of this innovation. Stop subsidizing this.
If electric cars are so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
The upfront costs of an electric vehicle are about $10,000 higher today than they are for an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle today, but that cost is declining substantially. Right. And so this is a temporary intervention to help the auto industry strategically compete in global markets and to transition as battery
You didn't
costs
hear
fall.
my admonition, okay?
Sorry.
Doc, how about, if electric vehicles are so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
I think sorry, Senator, I'll step
I'm
away
sorry,
from.
I can't see the names.
Oh, it's Gross, Ms. Gross here. I'll defer
Ma'am.
to not comment on policy questions about incentives and so on. Maybe
Tell
pass
me
it
your
off to
name. I
Ms.
can't
Hinman.
see your name tag.
Gross? I can switch.
Oh, okay, I'm
I
sorry.
can swivel it.
I apologize. Would you start over?
I was just going to say I'd like to defer on policy grounds, not to talk about policy incentives and so on. Defer over to my
Why not?
colleague here, Ms. Hinman.
You don't believe in electric cars?
Oh, totally support electric vehicles and drive 3 of them myself.
So if they're so swell, how come we're having to pay people to drive them?
So just speaking personally, then, not representing my company at this point.
Sure.
Speaking personally.
Who's your company?
EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute.
Oh, okay.
And I have to be careful about policy, stepping into, wading too deeply into policy as an independent leader here. But when we think about, again, I just want to ditto what Dr. Jenkins said. This is an effort to compete
Yes,
globally.
ma'am, I know all that, but how, if they're so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
Well, maybe then the quick answer for me is I didn't take advantage of incentives, but I also bought used vehicles on the market. I love it. They're wonderful to drive. And so on.
Okay.
Senator, similar for myself, we
What's your
purchased
name?
Maureen Hinman.
Damn.
My hair's longer in my picture, sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't even know who I'm talking to. Go ahead, Ms. Hinman.
I did want to follow up with my colleague, Ms. Gross. I purchased my first EV, fully
Yes,
electric.
ma'am, but
in
if they're so
2015.
swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
Well, I purchased. I can only speak for myself, but we purchased our first vehicle in 2015 because it was easier to charge, cheaper to drive. It drives better, faster, smoother. There's no muck on the bottom of our garage. And frankly, when I had my first child, some of the safety features were just better.
But here's what I'm sorry, you're not answering my question. How many vehicles, how many cars do we have in the United States?
280.
This lady right here, in the middle. I'm sorry, if I could see your name, I wouldn't just point to you.
If I could, I'd like to defer to my colleague who
Well,
has
I'd like
better.
to hear your answer, okay?
How many calls?
How many cars are there?
295 million?
Okay, and what percentage are electric vehicles?
1.6.
Okay, hold up that chart. Here's where all the electric vehicles are. California loves them. The West Coast loves them. Everybody else is kind of lukewarm. Okay, and I'm trying to understand why. But let me move on to this. Let me ask these two gentlemen. I think the reason is because they're more expensive, and people when they drive a car like it to run, and when it runs out of electricity, it stops, and they can't find a place to charge them. So let me ask these two gentlemen. I don't want to be unfair. So it's clear we got a long way to go. We got 283 million cars in America, and we got 3.3 million electric vehicles. We got a long way to go. And at least these three folks think that we need to take taxpayer money and give enough money to American people so they'll walk away from gas cars and drive electric vehicles. How much is that going to cost? I'm going to ask them in a second if I have time. But how much do you think it will cost for us to basically bribe every American to drive an electric car?
Well, Senator, excuse me, Dave Schwietert with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. I would just underscore your original question with this. There's really two things at play as it relates to what's
How much
happening.
money do you think it'll cost
Costs
to
are
bribe the American people enough to make them drive electric cars, to move those numbers?
Electrification's increasing as it relates to cost. Only a fraction of currently eligible
How much do you
vehicles
think
are
it'll
eligible
cost?
for the federal tax credit. So
How much do you think it'll cost, David?
Senator, I think I quoted earlier
I'm
that
calling on you, sir.
Apologies.
How much do you think it'll cost?
It ultimately depends on
You
consumer
don't know,
adoption.
do you?
We don't have an exact figure.
You think
no,
we ought
Senator.
to just keep throwing money at it until we hit the jackpot? How about you, Mr. Davis?
Eventually, if you put enough charging stations there to solve for range anxiety, because the reason I didn't buy one is because I may have to drive 450 miles
What
to
do you
East
think
Tennessee
it'll
to Florida.
cost the American taxpayer for us to convince the American people, frankly, bribe the American people to get rid of the gas car and drive an electric car? Can any of you give me a figure?
Yes, Senator, the Treasury Department reports we spent about $1 billion year to date. So for the first half of this year, so roughly $2 billion this
Well,
year.
we're behind.
As I noted,
How much do you think it'll cost, Doctor? You're a doctor,
so
right?
$2 billion this year is what the estimate from the Treasury
Okay,
Department.
How much do you think it will cost for us to, let's say, get 75% of these 200?
How much will it cost American consumers to remain?
How much? Do you know how much it'll cost, Doctor?
No one knows the future with certainty, Senator.
Right. You just think we ought to keep throwing money at it until we hit the jackpot.
I think we ought to set a stable policy framework that allows American consumers to become familiar with the environment and American businesses to innovate and to compete within that stable framework. That's what I said
And how
earlier in
much
my
will
testimony.
that cost?
Will cost less than the benefits delivered by
You
the
don't
policy.
care how much it costs, do you?
I care if the benefits exceed the costs. I don't care about the costs.
You
These are
don't care how
investments
much
in the
it
public.
costs, do you?
I care very much how much it costs. As long as the benefits exceed the costs, that's an investment worth making.
Well, so, okay.
How much
So-
does it cost to seed the industries of the future to China?
I get to ask the questions, Doc.
Sorry.
You're at Princeton, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. How are Jewish students doing at Princeton? Are they feeling better?
No, that has
more
nothing to do with the hearing today. I'm not going to comment on that.
I didn't think you'd want to talk about that. Do any of you have any idea how much it would cost
Senator,
to get, say, 75% of the American people
Senator,
driving electric cars?
if I could, your question is fair. One answer to it is the cost of inaction of the U.S. not competing is far greater than any incentive on the front
Okay,
end.
quantify that for me. Oh, man, I'm way over. I'm sorry, Sheldon. Quantify that for me, because here's
Why
my...
don't you wrap up with this, because I think
I will.
everybody's had a chance to try to
I will.
answer your question, and
Here's
you're
my
repeating
problem.
it at this
Okay,
point.
we all want clean air, we all want bright water, we all want to eat, and we all want to live indoors, okay? But there are trade-offs in all of this. Despite what the Princeton professor thinks, we don't have unlimited money. This is not Princeton. So we have to decide the cost and the benefits. And nobody seems to be able to quantify the costs. They just say, keep throwing money at it, throwing money at it, throwing money at it. And nobody can really quantify the benefits, except if we don't do it, then we're all going to die. And when I go back to my people and say, your electricity costs have gone up 30%, but it's for a good cause. Why, Kennedy? Because you're going to die if we don't do it. Why, Kennedy? Because a professor at Princeton says so. That doesn't work for most Americans. Can you answer that for me? You see my frustration. I love driving an electric car. I think they're really cool. But the median household income in my state's $55,000. Our Princeton professor probably makes that in a week. Okay? They don't care what they think at Princeton. Can you answer that for me, guys?
I can't answer how much it's going
Good.
to cost, but I can tell you that just last year alone, China in the EV market subsidized it by $12.4 billion, and that's their annual spend. It's more than, even with in our best year, it's more than two-thirds of the United States
great,
spends.
but let me ask you a question. How much will it cost China to become carbon neutral by 2050?
I am very concerned. Well, they won't, but I'm more concerned about the
How much
risk
would it
to the
cost
U.S.
them?
economy of
How
losing
much
the
would
auto
it-
manufacturing
How much would
industry.
it cost them? Do you know? See, nobody talks about the cost. I'll tell you how much it'll cost them. It'll cost them $1 trillion a year, starting today, to be carbon neutral by 2050. You know how much it'll cost Russia? $250 billion a year, 3 times what their defense budget. Now, if you believe that Vladimir Putin is going to spend $250 billion for climate change, then you'll never own your own home. So we go spend all this money, which y'all can't quantify. We just keep spending. They don't spend the money. They're at an advantage, and you know how much world temperatures are lowered? None. Zero, zilch, nada. And I can't believe our chairman hadn't cut me off. But I am done.
Now's your moment. Thank you,
I am
Senator
done.
Kennedy, for your enthusiastic participation in this hearing.
I just wish we had
Let
time
me,
to talk about all this. I think this is
Wrap up,
fascinating.
and our hearing is adjourned.